Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. In this video I'm going to take you through how I've painted my argent shroud for my sister of battle. I'm working on a slightly different unit, so this is my kit bashed celestian sacresants. If you're interested on how I've kit bashed these, I'll put a link to the video down so you can check it out if you want. Now with these I've started off with a black spray and a lead belcher over the top, and that is going to be massively time saving because it's a bulk of this model is going to be metallic, so you could just dry brush the metal up if you wanted, but I do also like the effect that putting the paints on top of metal has. Now I'm not doing pure argent shroud for my army, I have done a slight subset. So if you wanted to follow it exactly, rather than painting the red onto the robes here, you would start off with an off-white bone colour, which is the next colour we're going to be painting onto the model. So we're using a bone white colour onto the face plates, all the fleur-de-lis, those kind of things, and even on the base because I do moulded bases. Now, why would you start off with this if you want a final white? Well, it's a good base coat to put down. It's time saving because you're working with one colour onto 3 or 4 areas, and the highlights you put on top of this later is what will make the variant when we go to it. So perfectly fine to do that if you're on the robes, if you were going for the white robes. Now we're using retributor armour onto the shield here because we want a nice brass effect shield. I do use a mix of GW and Vallejo paints and some army painter and lots of other things. I'll put them in the description down below exactly what I've used so you can follow along if you want, or you can just take this as inspiration. Now there is a lot of detail in the sisters model, so what I'm choosing to do with the brass colour is kind of the shoulder poultry part at the top where it links, some little bits of the weaponry, just picking out some of the detailing on the chest plates, that kind of thing, and you can do as much or as little as you want. At this stage I'm not painting all the rivets on the cloak or anything, the buttons, we'll work on those later with the same brass colour. Now I'm painting a leather colour onto the hands, just a light brown. Now I didn't do this with the rest of my sisters, I left them with steel coloured gloves, and this is something you can do on a specialist unit like this to differentiate them from the rest of the army. You know, do something a little bit different on a specialist unit to make them stand out a little. So this is what I've chosen to do with the gloves, and we'll do some extra highlighting later. Now flesh on the faces, the bulk of my models I've left with a helmet, you can see here, but we're just laying down a basic flesh colour. And in the helmets, another point of differentiation, which I'll show you my basic sisters later, is that on my special troops I do bright green lenses. Standard troops I do yellow. Just to, again, little point of differentiation, but the bulk of the scheme is going to be the same. And I just pick a colour for the grenades, any old colour you like, and we just put in blue on here. And I suppose this shows my approach to how I do my armies. I want them to all match, but I do want things to stand out depending on units. Now, we've done all the base coats. Ink wash stage, I'm using a reikland fleshshade onto the brass because I want it to be a warm, rich brass tone. I don't particularly want the shields to be dirty, I want to go for a different effect on them, so I find the reikland fleshshade with its slight pinky tones works quite well over brass colour, just to put something different on there. And then I'm back to a sepia toned dirty wash on the rest of the model, the armour and the base. And when I show you my other sisters later on, I've used this wash over the entire model because I want a kind of dirty, mucky effect. Now what this will do is it will give different tones to different parts of the model, and again, ties the army some visual difference. It's fairly simple. Now when the wash has dried, we're now on to the first highlight stage. So we're working with the same colours we've already used, and we are going over the raised areas that will hit the light, the bits that will be the visually first thing you look at. You want to go back over with the same red. Now again, the point about doing slightly different things on the character models, with the rest of the sisters I used just the initial red we painted with. On the Celestians here you'll see I'm putting a brighter red onto the palette and really just very, very gently edge highlighting. So you can see hopefully how I've done maybe a third of the red covering over with the initial red, then just the edges with the first red we used. Now I wasn't overly happy with how the wash settled into these sisters, so I've watered down the base coat red to a really thin glaze consistency, and we're just glazing over the entire model, trying to keep it up to the raised edges first, and that will just lift those recessed areas a little bit without laying too much paint down. Now this is literally 75% water, 25% of the paint, just to, I suppose, get the reds to the level we're after. And this is what I mean, you've got to sort of get used to how you paint your army. Now onto the leather here, I'm just using the initial light brown we use for the gloves and the pouches and things. Not going to do a secondary colour on this, because again I want this to be a fairly quick colour scheme, but I want to do some little details that do make them stand out. So I've chosen to do the red with an extra highlight on the Celestians, but I'm not going to go into that detail with the leather because again I still want to be fairly swift with doing it. Now just a quick point on the basing, I'm not really showing you how I've done the base, but the same principle applies to the basing. you know, it's just one highlight with that first initial layer that we used. Again, onto the bone colours that we've done with that off-white colour initially. So I talked before about how when we highlight up, we'll use different highlight colours to really differentiate the areas that we've base coated with the same colour. So I am starting off with the exact same off-white, you know, the bleach bone colour that we started initially, and we're going over all the areas. So we're using the fleur-de-lis and we're going onto the helmet. Well, hang on, we're not differentiating, I might hear you say. But after we've let this layer dry, then we go back with a pure white colour and do a final highlight on the helmet with that pure white. Again, same principles. We're putting quite a lot of the bone white colour down, but leaving all the shading in the recesses from that wash. And then when we come to this final white layer, we're covering probably half of what we put down with the first highlight layer. And that's the thing, work gradually. You know, you want to put less on as you come up with the colour differentiations. So now hopefully you'll see that the shoulder bone colour looks very different to the helmet bone colour, because we've now moved that up to the white. Okay, so now onto the armour, and this is the most important part of this model, obviously, because this is what makes them argent shroud. So we're working with any metallic colour you want to choose, but we've got like a gunmetal colour, so it is slightly brighter than the lead belcher we've laid down. Obviously the lead belcher is now darkened up with that wash we've put on. Same principle. This actually is a lot easier than you would think. You are putting this metallic colour down and covering probably 90% of every armour panel. All that you're after doing is leaving the shade into the recesses and bringing up the silver colour everywhere else. So there is no difficulty in doing this really. Just be clean, be neat, work your way around the model. You might want to do a second layer on the very raised areas and it will brighten it up. Now I'm talking about the buttons we said earlier. We didn't use the retributor armour onto the buttons for the robe earlier because the wash would have darkened it down so much. Really doesn't have an impact. So little brush, go through. We've done the same principle on the shield with the retributor armour colour. It looks different because it's had a different wash on it, so it brings it up slightly differently. Now we're using some of the really quite cool nihilakh oxide from Games Workshop, living on the edge again with the open pot, and dotting this in random locations on the shield because we're going for an aged brass effect. Now these are cast up shields that I've made using some 2-part Green Stuff World molds. If you want to know how to do that, again, I'll drop it in the description down below. So there are a couple of bits of nicks and damages on the shields, and kind of that's where I'm focusing that oxide colour, because then you're making use of the slight imperfections you might have occurred when you've made the model. Now onto the flesh. I have done a little bit extra on here that was missing off the camera, so I've put a little bit of red onto a bottom lip, dropped a little bit of black into her eyeball, but then it's a simple matter of the same flesh colour and dropping that onto a face to bring those details up. So you can see here it's all fairly simple techniques throughout this entire model. There's nothing overly challenging in here. It's just learning that, you know, do your base colours, keep neat and tidy as you're going through. After the wash layer, you know, again, it's using the base colours, gentle highlights, gentle detail, and the key thing for me is going an extra bit forward on, you know, special units or characters. So there's a model finished. I'm just going to compare it to one that I'd already done as my tester model. Now one left has been varnished, and you will see again the reds look slightly different because there's been a bit of layer of varnish put on, so bear that in mind when you're painting as well. Get used to what the varnish colours do to your painting models. So if I was doing it for a cabinet, I probably wouldn't varnish them, but I have. Now on the right there is a standard sister from the rest of the army with a heavier layer of varnish. You can see didn't use the gloves in the leather colour, but actually the rest is fairly similar. So really like the effect that it's had on the models. I quite like the brass aged effect. Really happy with the unit. Hopefully you guys liked that as well. Now I've been getting these ready for a big game coming up, which on the day that this video gets launched, we're actually setting up for the game this morning. So I've dropped a picture here of the army that I'm about to use, the 3,000 points of sisters with an allied knight army. I'll be playing that, so check my Instagram out. I'll probably put a couple of shots on today as doing it. And I'll probably do a video with my first sort of gaming one, and we'll see how we go. So like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and hopefully I'll see you next time.